Methods and machines, marble and clay. The tools you choose to edit with can have a determining effect on the final product. But when I started editing in 1965, there was really just one option, at least in Hollywood. The Moviola, a stand-up editing machine virtually unchanged since the 1930s that looks something like a sewing machine and sounds like one. In the early days of Zoetrope Studios, which was founded on a European model, we used imported Steinbecks or Chems, horizontal editing machines from Germany that were quieter and handled the film more gently, had 2 large screens and 2 soundtracks, and were better able to handle large amounts of film. Now, of course, the landscape has been permanently altered by the computer, electronic digital editing machines such as Avid and Lightworks that harness together a video display terminal and a computer with large-scale memory bank where the film's images and sounds can be stored digitally. Footnote: for a more complete survey of the current nonlinear systems, see the afterword, Nonlinear Digital Editing, The Unbearable Lightness. I feel equally comfortable working on a Moviola, a Chem Universal, or an Avid. It depends on the film's budget and schedule, and on my hunch about the style of the director and how long the average take is going to be. The Conversation was edited on a Chem, Julia on a Moviola, Apocalypse Now on a Chem, whereas I use both on Unbearable. It started out on a Moviola and changed to a Chem. With the Chem, I arrange things opposite of the way they are normally done, so that the screen directly in front of me is the search screen, and the soundtrack in front of me is in sync with that. The screen on the left side and the sound on the right side are in sync with each other and hold the assembled film. If I were working on a bench, that would be what's going through the synchronizer. In fact, speaking of benches, I should add that I work standing up. My Chem is raised about 15 inches off of the floor to put it at the right height for me. One of the things I always liked about the Moviola is that you stand up to work, holding the Moviola in a kind of a brace, dancing with it in a way, so it was frustrating for me to have to sit down at the Chem. I edited both The Conversation and Apocalypse that way, sitting down, but a voice in the back of my head kept telling me something wasn't quite right. And so when I came to edit Unbearable, I had the Chem raised up on 2 plywood boxes. Editing is a kind of surgery. And have you ever seen a surgeon sitting to perform an operation? Editing is also like cooking, and no one sits down at the stove to cook. But most of all, editing is a kind of dance. The finished film is a kind of crystallized dance. And when have you ever seen a dancer sitting down to dance? Other than the standing sitting questions, the difference between the Moviola system and the Chem system boil down to sculptural ones. The Moviola system emulsifies the film into little bits, individual shots, and then the editor reassembles it out of those bits, making something out of the clay. You take a little bit of clay, you stick it here, and you take another little bit of clay and stick it there. At the beginning of the process, there is nothing in front of you. Then there is something in front of you, and then there is finally the finished thing, all built up out of little clay bricks, little pellets of information. With the Chem system, I don't ever break the film down into individual shots. I leave it in 10-minute rolls in the order in which it came from the lab. In structural terms, this is like a block of marble. The sculpture is already there, hidden within the stone, and you reveal it by taking away rather than building it up piece by piece from nothing, as you do with clay. It is really the difference between random access editing and its opposite, whatever it's called, linear access, let's say. Computerized digital editing, and strangely enough, good old-fashioned Moviola editing with an assistant are both random access, non-linear systems. You ask for something specific, and that thing alone is delivered to you as quickly as possible. You are only shown what you are asked for. The Avid is faster at that than the Moviola, but the process is the same. There's a drawback for me because your choices can then only be as good as your requests, and sometimes that is not enough. There is a higher level that comes through recognition. You may not be able to articulate what you want, but you can recognize it when you see it. What do I mean by that? Well, if you learn to speak a foreign language, you will find that there is a gap between how well you can speak it and how well you can understand it when it is spoken to you. A human being's ability to understand foreign language is always greater than his ability to speak it. And when you make a film, you're trying to learn a foreign language. It just happens to be a unique language that is only spoken by this one film. If you have to articulate everything, as you do with random access systems like Video or Computer or Moviola/Assistant, you are limited by what and how much you can articulate and how good your original notes were. Whereas the advantage of Chem's linear system is that I do not always have to be speaking to it. There are times when it speaks to me. The system is constantly presenting things for consideration, and a sort of dialogue takes place. I might say, I want to see that close-up of Teresa number 317 on roll 45, but I'll put that roll on the machine, and as I spool down to number 317, which may be hundreds of feet from the start, the machine shows me everything at high speed down to that point, saying in effect, how about this instead, or this? I find more often than not, long before I get down to shot 317, I've had 3 other ideas triggered by the material I've seen flashing by me. Oh, this other shot is much better than the one I thought I wanted. As soon as I saw it, I recognized as a possibility, whereas I couldn't articulate it as a choice. When you look at dailies for the first time, you have a relatively fixed idea based on the script of what you're looking for. Later on, though, you review some of your original notes and they will say, for instance, 212-4:NG. What does that mean? It meant at the time you thought take 4 of Slate 212 was no good, and you didn't bother to make a note of why you thought so. Well, many times in the re-editing, what you thought was originally unusable may come to your salvation. If it was a question of only 1 shot or 24 shots, you could probably deal with the problem of second-guessing those original notes. But in fact, an ordinary film will have 700, 1,000, 2,000 setups, with more than 2 printed takes per setup on average. And so there may easily be 2,000 to 4,000 shots that you have to have an opinion about. That's a lot of second-guessing, so you tend to fall back on your first impressions and original notes, which are valuable but limited if that's all you have. Whereas with the Chem system, because the film is all stored in these big rolls in an almost arbitrary way, you are learning something new about the material as you search for what you think you want. You are actually doing creative work, and you may find what you really want rather than what you thought you wanted. This system is useful enough in the original assembly of scene in helping you to familiarize yourself with the material, but it becomes particularly valuable in recutting, where your original notes, heavily influenced by the script, become less and less useful as the film finds its own voice. There are limits, of course. A system that is too linear, which means that you have to spend too much time searching before you find what you want, would be burdensome. You would quickly become overwhelmed and or bored with it, so there is a golden mean somewhere. If the system is completely random access, that is a defect in my opinion, but if it is too linear, that's a defect as well. What I found, personally, is that given the attitude I have toward the material, given the speed that I work, and given the mechanical speed of the Chem itself, keeping the dailies in 10-minute reels in shooting order adds just about the right amount of chaos that I need in order to work the way I want to. The digital systems, Avid and Lightworks, are promising because they offer the potential to merge the best of Moviola's nonlinear approach with the best of Chem's ability to handle and review large amounts of material quickly. At this point, there's still some procedural awkwardness with the digital system, but I expect those to be smoothed out over time. In any case, there are certain things that remain the same for me no matter what system I am using. I would always review the material twice, once at the beginning, the day after the material is shot, noting down my first impression, including any notes the director cares to give me, and then when I was ready to cut a particular scene. I would collect all the relevant material and review it again, making notes in more detail than the first time. When you look at rushes the second time, you have evolved and the film has evolved. You will see different things than you saw the first time because you may have assembled scenes that hadn't been shot the first time when you saw the material, and strengths or problems may be emerging with characters and events as they unfold. In an ideal world, what I would like to do is assemble a first cut, then stop, and just look at all the dailies again fresh. Whether I would ever actually be able to do that is another question. The present schedule for films, at any rate, prohibits such a thing. This is where the hidden virtues of linear Chem system comes in, because of the way the material is stored in 10-minute rolls of film. It is constantly being reviewed. If this were gardening, I would be talking about the virtues of turning over the soil and aerating it. In the actual editing of a scene, I will keep on working until I can no longer see myself in the material. When I review my first assembly of a scene, more often than not, I can still too vividly, recall making decisions that led to each of the cuts. But as the scene is reworked and refined, it reaches a point, hopefully, where the shots themselves seem to create each other. This shot makes the next shot, which makes the next shot, etc. In this way, the Walter Murch who decided things initially gradually recedes until finally there comes a point where he has become invisible and the characters take over the shots. The emotion, the story seem to take over. Sometimes, the best times, this process reaches the point where I can look at the scene and say, I didn't have anything to do with that. It just created itself. As far as the color balance of the final prints goes, I've had a few good experiences, but many have been frustrating for one reason or another. The worst thing is that the lab shows the film at 24 frames per second, and sometimes even at 32 FPS, without the ability to stop or go backwards. You're sitting there and saying, that shot should be redder. Which one? The close-up of the foot, but already 8 shots have gone by. Most often, the impression you get is that they are doing this as a courtesy just to keep you quiet. One way that works for me, where you can really see what's going on and get specific in your notes about color, is to take the work print and first answer print and put them in sync over a light box of the correct color temperature. There is something about low-level light coming through a piece of film that enables you to see the tonalities that are almost invisible if you are looking at a bright screen of projected light. There may be residual greenness, but you look at the film in a viewing theater and you'll say, I don't know, is this shot a little green or is it too blue? And of course, before you've decided, you are looking at something else. If you work with the Lightbox system, the green will just leap out, especially if you've got your original work print there for comparison. And you can stop, go forward, go backward, etc. If you are fortunate enough to be working with a good color timer, at a good laboratory, of course, it is like any sort of successful collaboration.